Welcome into Illini Cast, part of the Armchair Illini Network. I'm your host, Austin Birkeland. You can follow me at Twitter at AB1132, at Illini Cast, and at Armchair Illini for all the latest Illini news and analysis. Joining me today as part of our summer school sessions, we're going to be talking about one of the new Big Ten universities, the USC Trojans. And joining us today is Alicia De Artola. She is from the Reign of Troy podcast. Alicia, how's it going?
Hi, it's good to be here. It's exciting to start to do Big Ten stuff. It's still a bit surreal.
I'm sure it is. What are the USC fans' reactions so far about being this close to Big Ten membership and leaving the Pac-12? I know there's some Pac-12 schools that had Big 12 Media Day that I'm sure that was kind of weird for some USC fans not to be a part of that with Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah.
Yeah, I think it's been mostly bittersweet. I think that there are some great rivalries that people are going to miss in the Pac-12, but at the same time, USC fans especially had been pretty frustrated with the Pac-12 all along. And so there's sort of this sense of new horizons with the Big Ten, excitement about getting to play teams like Michigan and Ohio State on the schedule as it runs through. So I think there's sort of a mix of sort of sadness at the death of the Pac-12, trepidation at the travel, and maybe some of the questions about USC's specific squad for this year about dealing with the physicality of the Big Ten. But mostly, I think it's exciting. I think it's something that people are looking forward to see USC competing, perhaps having more opportunities at a higher level because of what the Big Ten brings.
Give us an internal fan scouting report on what kind of fans we'll see from Oregon, Washington, and UCLA.
UCLA football fans are pretty self-deprecating, self-hating. There are rivals, but some of my best friends are UCLA football fans, so that they can be fun. Oregon fans are they can be a lot. They are very ambitious. They will let you know when they are having success. And when it comes down to it, USC fans generally respond to them with the O for Oregon's number of national titles. So there's just a constant back and forth there. Washington fans are pretty great. They are a little bit less obnoxious at times than Oregon fans can be, but they love their team. They're passionate about the Huskies, and I think mostly they're a fan base that just wants to wake up and be a national brand the way that I think that they think they can be, which obviously they've proven they can theoretically be given the success very recently. So yeah, they're all I think they're all good fan bases. Every fan base has its good eggs and bad eggs, but there's always good people to find.
Now, you talked about the clash of styles a little bit. How do you think USC will respond to the physicality of the Big Ten, at least in the short term, next season?
In the short term, it's a huge question mark because USC's biggest weaknesses at this point are in the trenches. The defensive line has a lot of questions. I don't think anyone around USC would tell you that USC has restocked that position well enough in the transfer portal or in recruiting recently. The offensive line is even thinner. I think the top line talent on the offensive line might be slightly better with Jonah Monheim being the sort of anchor on that offensive line, but there are a lot of question marks, a lot of young players, a lot of guys that are going to be called upon that have been unproven, and very few players behind them to replace them if something goes wrong. So USC is walking on a tightrope when it comes to the trenches going into the Big Ten. And I think there's a universe where USC has, with the new defensive line coach, Eric Henderson from the Rams, that he is able to transform that defensive line. And suddenly we're not talking about that because he's getting more out of the players that were there anyways. And the offensive line showed some real positivity in the Holiday Bowl. A lot of young guys that people at USC are excited about. So there's a universe where both of those things sort itself out and it's not a problem. There's also a universe where one or two injuries hit, and suddenly USC's in a huge, huge, huge mess in the trenches, and the Big Ten is in position to potentially expose that. So it's definitely the biggest question mark for USC coming in, and it's basically going to be the thing that decides whether or not USC has a good debut in the Big Ten or not, because you can't have success at any stage of football if your offensive and defensive lines aren't up to the task, and the task will be even greater than usual. And just given size that USC is going to face, which they've not necessarily been at a size disadvantage very often, even if the performance of the lines have been just mediocre, I think, over the last few years.
8-5 with Caleb Williams as quarterback last year. What would you grade the season of last year?
Oh, offensively, I'd give it a B. I think that the offense still looked dynamic at times. The offensive line was certainly a concern, but Caleb Williams made up for a lot of that. Defensively, I would give it an F minus minus minus. If I could go lower than F, I would. It was the worst defense I have ever seen in my life watching any level of football. I cannot express how miserable it was watching that defense last year. So in that sense, the season was a failure. If I have to give a sort of overall grade, the season was an overall failure because with Caleb Williams and the offense that USC had, which was not its best offense, but certainly capable enough, they could have easily won 10 games, been competitive, been in the conversation for the Pac-12 title if the defense was not a just a huge weight on the entire program. So yeah, I think that about sums it up. If I'm talking about the offense, I feel fine. If I'm talking about the defense, I want to go into the corner and cry. It was traumatic.
So Lincoln Riley, what are USC fans' thoughts on him? Are they happy, content, or are they building their pitchforks? Or what is the response to Lincoln Riley's tenure as the Trojan coach so far?
I think there's a lot of frustration because a lot of USC fans pretty much clocked instantly that Alex Grinch wasn't the answer at defensive coordinator. And there was a lot of frustration that Lincoln Riley's inaction on that front basically led to what happened in 2023. I think every USC fan would look at it, offensively and say, yeah, Lincoln Riley's offense is very good. It's a massive improvement over what Clay Helton was fielding. But is Lincoln Riley a better offensive coordinator than he is a head coach? I think that's a question that USC fans are having because his defensive decision making, at least in terms of the people that he's hired, have been a huge question mark. I I don't know that the pitchforks are out quite yet. If he doesn't show signs of life in terms of the defensive decisions that he made with hiring Danton Lynn and bringing in the defensive coaching staff that he brought in, which is a staff full of overqualified coaches. If we're being honest, if they can't succeed defensively, then maybe there is some truth to the idea that Lincoln Riley doesn't however it is that he manages his teams, that defense is just not something that he can handle as far as having his offense be good and his defense. Then I think the pitchforks will start to come out. Right now, most of the frustration around the program has more to do with NIL and some of the things that are maybe over Lincoln Riley's head in terms of the recruiting ability, USC's ability to be competitive on the recruiting front relative to an Oregon or an Ohio State. Those things, I think Lincoln Riley is not necessarily being scapegoated on that front yet. He's not far from losing the fan base, though. It's a little bit scary how close he is to losing the fan base after 2 years. Personally, I think it's a little bit premature. I think you sort of have to see what happens with the new defensive coordinator before you sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater. But last year eroded a lot of confidence, I think.
So the coaching staff changes on defense. How about personnel wise? What changes for the defense will we see from the Trojans?
Yeah, so they went out and stole UCLA's defensive coordinator Danton Lynn. He is still a very young defensive coordinator, but the turnaround that he did with UCLA's defense was tremendous. They went from a defense that was almost as bad as USC's 2022 defense, and became a top 10 in pretty much most metrics under Danton Lynn. They brought him in, and then they added, like I said, a bunch of kind of overqualified guys. Doug Belk is the secondary coach. He was a defensive coordinator at his previous job. Matt Entz was an FCS head coach, national title winner. He's coming in to coach the linebackers. Eric Henderson was the defensive line coach at the Rams. Not just Aaron Donald's defensive line coach, but one who was producing like rookie of the year candidates on the defensive line for LA. He comes in to coach the defensive line. So there is a lot of positivity around the additions that USC has made on the coaching staff. They also added a bunch of transfers to transform the defense, highlighted by Kamari Ramsey and John Humphrey, who were taken from UCLA, and then Akili Arnold and Easton Mascarenas Arnold, the linebacker and safety pairing, brothers from Oregon State. So those are all, they were very, very good Pac-12 defenders that USC has brought in to fix positions of extreme need, particularly linebacker. But I think the big area that people will look at and say USC did not do enough in terms of transforming is the defensive line. USC returns Bear Alexander. They brought in Nate Clifton from Purdue, and a couple other guys, but no big names, no big guys. USC doesn't really have the 300 plus pound nose tackle that you want. And USC thought they had that in Isaiah Rakes, and then he transferred out to go back home to Auburn. So there's a big gap there. USC has made a lot of really positive changes on the defensive line, on the defensive end across the board. The question for USC continues to be, is it enough? And can they hit the ground running? Because there's no leeway. USC starts the season with LSU and Michigan in the first 3 games.
Caleb Williams made his flight from Los Angeles to the great state of Illinois in Chicago. So what's the quarterback room going to look like for the Trojans this year?
The quarterback room is led by Miller Moss. He has not been named the starter officially, but he is representing USC at Big Ten Media Days, so I'm pretty certain that he's the starter. USC also added Jaden Mayava from UNLV. He's sort of a talented kid who started and had some dynamism to him. But really, Miller Moss has been in the program learning under Lincoln Riley. He is USC through and through. He is a Trojan. I was having this conversation with on my podcast, Rainer Troy Radio, yesterday, about how if Miller Moss was not a quarterback who had a football scholarship, Miller Moss would still be at USC. That's sort of who he is. And so I think he is somebody that a lot of USC fans want to see succeed. He was a 4-star recruit, sort of been compared to Drew Brees in his reading of the game and his ability to sort of deliver touch passes, but certainly not a once in a generation talent like Caleb Williams. Certainly not as mobile as Caleb Williams. That's where Jaden Mayava has a leg up. But USC is kind of banking on the Lincoln Riley of it all. Every Lincoln Riley quarterback has been very, very good. And if Lincoln Riley has chosen Miller Moss as his guy, it feels like that's got to be a good sign. I mean, he threw 6 touchdown passes in the Holiday Bowl, so that's the hope from USC, is that he can come in and live up to the Lincoln Riley standard, even while accepting that the quarterback position is going to take a step back simply because Caleb Williams was, not human.
So, who would you say is the preseason offensive player of the year for the Trojans and the preseason defensive player of the year for the Trojans?
Oh man, that is a very good question. I think that there is a lot of excitement in the receiving core between some young guys that aren't household names by any measure, but any one of them could become it. Makai Lemon, who's a slot guy, Zachariah Branch, who's a big special teams guy that people want to see do more as a receiver, Jacoby Lane, big-bodied wide receiver, Deuce Robinson was a high school tight end that has been converted to a wide receiver. I think any one of those guys, I would not be surprised at the end of the year if they were USC's offensive player of the year. I just couldn't necessarily tell you which one because they are also so full of potential but unproven, and we don't know exactly how that pecking order is going to shake out. I think, as with all teams, at a certain point, you just side with the quarterback at Miller Moss.
Absolutely. So let's go overarching on the football program. How has Coach Riley done in the transfer portal in recruiting? What have been the challenges, and what have been the overarching successes of the Lincoln Riley tenure?
Well, year one was a resounding success. I think it was way more successful than anyone expected. USC flipped a 4-8 roster, lost basically cleaned out a bunch of transfers, not quite the way that Colorado did, but not actually not that far off the complete flip of a roster. And they were able to turn around and win, 11 games with Caleb Williams leading the way. It had a lot of success with the wide receivers that they brought in. Jordan Addison obviously was a massive success. And the running backs that USC has brought in, the Marshawn Lloyd this past year, Travis Dye the year before. So the transfer portal has been very good to USC. The problem is that it has not been good to USC in positions of extreme need, like the trenches. One of my favorite conversations I have with an Oregon podcast, Quack 12, Hithloday there is their sort of film guy, and he has a theory that you can't rely on transfer offensive linemen unless you get them early and sort of have them integrated into your system. You can't flip an offensive line the way that you can a receiver room with just bringing together a bunch of big offensive line transfers. And I think USC learned that last season, where the 2022 offensive line was full of established fifth-year senior guys and did very well. And then last year they tried to plug a bunch of holes with transfers, and the five never worked, and it became sort of a problem. So there have been hits and misses on that front, and unfortunately, most of the misses have been in the trenches, which is where USC really needs the help. This past year, as I was sort of alluding to before, USC added, found another running back in Woody Marks from oh my gosh, he's not from South Carolina. He's from because Marshawn Lloyd was from South Carolina. I'm blanking. Mississippi State. Sorry, Mississippi State's Woody Marks. All of those middling SEC programs run together in my head sometimes.
Absolutely.
So at running back, that's been a really good addition. And like I mentioned, the rundown of the defensive additions on the transfer portal. The problem is that USC lost a bunch of recruiting battles in the transfer portal to Oregon, to Ohio State, to Alabama, to Texas A&M, and that's been very, very frustrating for USC from an additions standpoint. I think that if you broke it down, USC has had a lot of really good level transfers, recruits added, not enough great level ones, which is what USC fans want to see.
NIL. I know you touched on it earlier on in the episode, but what are the problems with NIL in the USC Trojans?
It depends on who you talk to. USC will tell you that they have plenty of money. I suspect they have plenty of money. There's a question of where USC is allocating that money and how. So USC has been very NIL focused in terms of NIL as marketing, as traditional sort of advertising kind of deals, as opposed to, for lack of a better term, like the pay for play kind of model that we're seeing across college football. That's been basically given the green light, and USC has to me, very obviously not prioritized NIL for high school recruits. It would seem to me that USC doesn't want to hand out those dollars to unproven players, which I understand that the idea there. I personally would throw any money possible to any 300-pound 5-star defensive lineman that I possibly could, but USC doesn't seem to be winning those bidding wars for that level of player, and that has USC fans really frustrated. There is talk of USC's NIL arm being a little bit disjointed, a little bit maybe mismanaged, maybe a little bit too behind the times in terms of the way that USC is presenting offers to players. That's all sort of behind the scenes, and it's a little bit hard to diagnose exactly what's wrong. The way I tend to see it is all of the above at certain levels contributing to an NIL performance from USC that is less than you would expect from USC. Not that USC doesn't have more resources than, the vast majority of programs out there, which, is something like, talking to an Illinois podcast. Like,
Yes,
I'm not going to sit here
absolutely.
and say that USC has less money than Illinois. That's crazy. But I think that where the frustration from USC comes from is Oregon has seemingly unlimited NIL dollars. Ohio State has gone out and done insane things in terms of transfer with whatever they're doing with their NIL. And if USC is aspiring to national title level competition, their NIL structure needs to be competitive with the national title contenders that exist out there, and it doesn't seem to be quite there.
How excited are fans about Eric Musselman taking over for the basketball program?
Very excited. At least from my perspective, I was very anti Andy Enfield for a long time personally. I found no joy watching Andy Enfield teams. So I'm excited to see Musselman come in and see what he does with his tournament resume. He's talking about flipping a roster. USC basketball's roster is just completely, everybody's gone, new transfers in left, right, and center. So it's going to be an interesting exploration over the next few months and into the season, sort of getting to know what is now an entirely from scratch team. But I don't think you can argue with the guy's resume relative to what USC has had in the recent past from a head coaching perspective. It is difficult for USC basketball, being the sort of ugly stepbrother at USC. There's always a battle to grab attention, and I think that's what Musselman's going to be, sort of swimming upstream a little bit on that front. But if I think people are optimistic about that hire.
I want you to grade the rest of the USC Athletic Department as a whole in terms of administration, in terms of other sports. How would you grade the academic year of USC of 2023-2024?
It's not at the peak that I've seen USC's athletic department across the board in terms of winning national titles across many sports. But it does feel like USC is starting to come together. It's been a very tumultuous time from an athletic department perspective for USC over the past few years, to be honest. I think that Jen Cohen came over to USC and almost certainly looked around and thought, wow, my hands are full now. So a lot of it is just sort of like putting the pieces together. But basketball seems to be hopefully trending in the right direction. Football is being invested in. Baseball is sort of hopefully trending in the right direction as well. And then, USC is always winning national titles in sand volleyball or being competitive in the water polo and trying to sort of USC does put a certain amount of emphasis on the non-revenue sports. And so in that sense, track and field is always competitive, or at least trying to be. They're investing in facilities for a lot of those programs, and so it does feel like the athletic department is at least stabilizing from where it was. It has the potential to be successful across the board, powerhouse level programs across the board, and it's not right there at this point.
So Los Angeles, I know, is a rather large, second biggest city in America. But what are some of the best experiences for fans coming from Champaign to Los Angeles for maybe a men's basketball game, volleyball game? What are some of the best experiences you say experience this in Los Angeles?
It's a big city, and there's a lot of places to go. Like I live in the San Fernando Valley, which is technically Los Angeles, but still it takes me an hour to get down to USC in the first place. So, it's you sort of got to pick your spots on what is Los Angeles and where is Los Angeles. But there's a ton to see. Obviously, the beach. Malibu is a must hit. I'm a bit of a nerd, so I love going to the Getty Villa or the Getty Center in terms of museums. There's just a lot to see. You can always. I'm a big hiker. I love to do hikes, and everybody always does the Hollywood sign, but there's a million other actually really cool things to see from a wilderness perspective, aside from the obvious stuff like within the city. You can go eat a lot of great food and experience. Like the arts district is really up and coming and has some really cool like gastropub kind of bar stuff. I don't know. Downtown is downtown. I don't know that downtown is a place that everyone wants to go, but there's, Universal Studios. You can go see the Harry Potter world, which is pretty freaking cool. Yeah, there's a million things. The observatory is pretty cool. The LA Zoo, maybe not as good as the San Diego Zoo, to be honest, but it's still a cool place. Like it's everything. Whatever you are interested in, there's something in LA for you. We are a city that is in part full of transplants, and the city sort of takes that on as a million different things to do at any given time.
Well, that is amazing. That sounds like a city that I want to visit. It's definitely on number one on my bucket list. But I'm going to put you on the spot here, Alicia. What is your favorite bites in the city of Los Angeles?
Oh Lord. Personally, for me, if people find themselves in the San Fernando Valley, which I don't know that you would stay here if you did come to Los Angeles, but who knows? It's maybe a little bit cheaper to get a hotel up here. I am all about Lido. Lido's Pizza is my local pizza joint, which I absolutely love. But realistically, in Los Angeles, I think that Langer's Deli is beyond everything. Their pastrami sandwich is absolutely to die for, in my opinion. Classic USC hang is for Mexican food is El Cholo. Really, you can't go wrong with any Mexican food. Whether you're going to like sort of taco, like a cheapy taco place like King Taco, or getting, sort of upscale Mexican food. There's a good place at the LA Live that I can't remember the name of. No matter where you go, you get good Mexican food. Oh man, the problem is that there are too many good places. I'm even blanking on everything. I'm trying to think of the thing about the thing about LA is, like I said, we're a city of transplants. We get a lot of different things. There's some pretty good barbecue places. I'm not saying they're Texas barbecue by any means, as a connoisseur of Texas barbecue, but I can scratch the itch at a place like Bloodsoe's, or Baby Blues, which recently reopened in Venice, and I'm very excited about that. But yeah, I it's tough to nail anything down. My number one recommendation would be simply walk into any Mexican food restaurant in Los Angeles, and I think you'll be happy.
That sounds like a plan. Alicia De Artola, thank you so much for your time. Where can people find you on social media, and where can people find your podcast?
Yeah, I'm at Penguin of Troy on Twitter. The podcast is at Reign of Troy, and we are Reign of Troy Radio. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Overcast, whatever podcast catcher you use, and on YouTube, Reign of Troy Radio. So, yeah, we're going to be talking USC football all fall. Where we've been doing, my co-host does, we call it a Big 10 minutes, where we run through each of the Big Ten teams and sort of go through how everyone got their mascot names. And I'm discovering that Big Ten mascot names are quite illogical and weird sometimes,
Yes, ab-
not straightforward in the slightest. But we enjoy that. We give thoughts on your fight songs and all of that kind of alumni weird facts. So I don't remember which episode we did Illinois in, but we can go back and recommend that one for the Illinois fans to see if we got things right or wrong.
Absolutely. I'd love to hear it, and I'll quote tweet it on social media and stuff, and get my input.
Yeah.
Alicia, thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to chatting whenever Illinois and USC lock up in various different sports.
Yes, definitely.
That was Alicia De Artola from the Reign of Troy podcast. This has been the Linacast, part of the Armchair Illini Network. Thank you.